What you think is a familiar road can turn into a pathway to your worst nightmare in the blink of an eye. The darkness of a late-night drive holds more than just solitude. Sometimes, it hides those who are waiting, watching, and turning the hum of your engine into a prelude to terror. Tonight, we follow 3 drivers who discovered that on an empty road, you are never truly alone. The end of a summer internship feels like the end of a long, strange dream. For David, a college junior, the dream had been an 8-week stint in Phoenix, Arizona, and the reality was a 6-hour drive back home to Southern California. It was just after 1 in the morning, and the landscape outside his beat-up sedan had melted into an endless, inky black canvas. He was somewhere deep in the Mojave Desert, on a stretch of Interstate 15 that felt less like a highway and more like a scar carved into the face of a forgotten planet. The only signs of life were the rhythmic thrum of his own engine and the lonely white lines that his headlights swallowed, one after another, into the oppressive darkness. He'd been pushing through since sunset, fueled by cheap gas station coffee and the burning desire to sleep in his own bed. The road was dead straight, a perfect line to the horizon. And for the last hour, he hadn't seen another car, another light, another soul. That's why the appearance of the truck felt so jarring. It wasn't that he saw it approach, it was that it was simply there. One moment, his rearview mirror was a black, empty void. The next, it held the faint, ghostly silhouette of a vehicle. There were no headlights, just a dark, hulking shape that seemed to have materialized directly out of the asphalt behind him. He blinked, rubbing the fatigue from his eyes, figuring he must have zoned out. He was on a long, straight patch of road with no on-ramps for miles. There was no logical way for something to have crept up on him so silently. It was an old model pickup, he could tell that much, rust-colored, or maybe just covered in a thick layer of desert dust, with a profile that was bulky and vaguely threatening. It was keeping a steady distance, maybe 100 yards back, a silent shadow tethered to his bumper. David tapped his brakes, a quick, nervous flicker of red lights. He just wanted it to pass. The idea of being followed on a road this empty sent a small, irrational tremor through him. But the truck didn't pass. It slowed with him, maintaining its precise distance. He sped up, pushing his car to 80, then 85. The shadow in his mirror matched his pace perfectly, its engine a low, unheard rumble somewhere out in the dark. A cold knot began to form in David's stomach. This wasn't a cautious driver. This was something else. He squinted into the mirror, trying to make out the driver. But the windshield was a patch of absolute black, reflecting nothing, as if it were a hole in reality. He flicked his own high beams on and off, a universally understood signal to turn on your damn lights. There was no response. The truck remained a dark, unlit phantom, its presence a heavy weight on the back of his car. For 20 minutes, the silent, unnerving dance continued. Every slight adjustment David made, the truck mimicked. He was beginning to feel a sense of claustrophobia, a bizarre feeling on a road surrounded by miles of open desert. It was like the darkness was pressing in, and this truck was the focal point of it all. Then, up ahead, he saw a sign. A small blue square promising a rest area in 2 miles. It wasn't much, just a pull-off, a place for truckers to catch a few hours of sleep. But to David, it felt like a sanctuary. He could stop, let the truck go by, and maybe splash some water on his face to clear his head. He signaled his exit, his turn signal blinking absurdly in the vast emptiness. As he pulled off the highway, his eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. As he'd feared, the truck's dark form followed him, peeling off the interstate without hesitation. The rest area was little more than a dirt lot, pockmarked with oil stains and forgotten trash. The only light came from a single, flickering fluorescent bulb above a pair of vandalized vending machines, casting a sickly, buzzing glow over the cracked pavement. David parked near the feeble light, his heart hammering against his ribs. The truck didn't pull up beside him. Instead, it rolled slowly to the far side of the lot, 100 feet away, and settled into the deepest shadows, its engine still a low, idling hum, its form almost completely swallowed by the darkness. The lights stayed off. David sat there, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. This was no longer just strange. It was overtly hostile. He was being cornered. Whatever game this was, he was an unwilling participant. He killed his engine, plunging his own car into darkness, and just watched. He thought about confronting them, about getting out and yelling. But the sight of that dark, silent truck paralyzed him. He was a college kid in a car that barely ran. He had no idea who or what was sitting over there in the dark. Anger was slowly being replaced by a much colder, more primal emotion. Fear. He decided to wait them out. He reclined his seat just enough to be out of direct view and told himself he'd just rest his eyes for a few minutes. Maybe they would get bored and leave. Exhaustion was a heavy blanket, and despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his eyelids felt like lead weights. He drifted into a tense, uneasy sleep. The low thrum of the truck's engine, the last sound he heard. He was woken not by a loud noise, but by a soft one. A faint click. It was so quiet, so subtle, that his sleeping brain almost dismissed it as part of a dream. But it was a clean metallic sound, and it came from the rear of his car. His eyes snapped open. He didn't move a muscle, didn't even dare to breathe. He slowly angled his head to get a view in, his side mirror. The truck was still there, a lump of shadow in the distance. But now, there were two figures standing at the trunk of his car. They were moving with a quiet, deliberate efficiency that spoke of practice. One man was crouched low, his hands working on something underneath the bumper, just out of sight. The other stood watch, his head on a slow swivel, scanning the empty lot. Even in the dim light, David could see he was holding something long and thin. A tire iron, maybe. Then the man who was crouched stood up, holding a small, black object in his hand, no bigger than a deck of cards. He pressed it firmly against the underside of David's bumper, and David heard another soft click as the magnet took hold. It was a GPS tracker. A cold, horrifying wave of understanding washed over him. They weren't here to rob him. Not now, not in this rest stop. This was far more methodical, far more sinister. They were marking him. They were going to follow him, track him to wherever he was going, maybe all the way back to his quiet suburban street. They were going to wait until he was home, asleep, vulnerable. The thought of these men knowing where he lived, of them showing up in the dead of night, sent a jolt of pure terror through him. His instincts screamed at him to lay on the horn, to scare them off. But a colder, more calculated thought took over. If he scared them now, they would just disappear, and he'd spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder. He had to act, now. Without another thought, he twisted the key in the ignition. The engine of his old sedan roared to life, a sudden, violent sound that shattered the dead silence of the lot. At the same time, his headlights flashed on, bathing the two men in a brilliant, blinding white light. For a split second, they were frozen, their faces caught in expressions of pure shock, and then a flash of raw fury. They had been caught. David didn't wait. He slammed the car into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The tires shrieked on the dirt as the car lunged forward, aimed not at the men, but at the exit back to the highway. He glanced in his rearview mirror and saw them scrambling back towards their truck. He had a head start, but he knew it wouldn't last. As he merged recklessly back onto the interstate, he saw the truck's headlights finally flare to life behind him. It shot out of the rest area and onto the highway, its engine roaring, and the chase was on. He pushed his car harder than he ever had before, the speedometer needle trembling past 100. The desert flew by in a blur of black and gray. But the truck was faster. Its headlights grew in his mirror, a pair of angry, white eyes getting closer and closer, relentlessly closing the gap. It was riding his bumper now, so close he could feel the vibrations of its powerful engine through his own frame. He swerved, trying to shake it, but it stuck to him like glue. This was no longer a quiet, creepy pursuit. This was a hunt. Just as a fresh wave of panic threatened to consume him, he saw it. A pinprick of warm, neon light on the horizon. A gas station. It was an all-night truck stop, an island of light and civilization in the vast, dark ocean of the desert. He aimed for it like a drowning man swimming for shore. He didn't signal, just wrenched the wheel to the right, his tires screaming as he veered onto the off-ramp. He looked in his mirror one last time. The truck didn't follow. It slowed, pulling to a stop at the edge of the highway, just outside the ring of light from the station. It sat there for a long moment, its headlights like a predator's eyes, watching him pull up to the safety of the gas pumps. Then, with a finality that was almost as terrifying as the chase itself, it made a slow, deliberate U-turn and merged back onto the highway, its taillights shrinking into the darkness until they were gone. David sat in his car for a long time, the engine off. The only sound the frantic pounding of his own heart. He never found out who those men were, or what they would have done had they followed him all the way home. Later, his hands still shaking, he reached under his bumper and felt the cold, hard plastic of the tracking device. He ripped it off and threw it as far as he could into the desert scrub. He knew he had been lucky, but the fear that night left a permanent scar. It wasn't the fear of what happened, but the chilling, inescapable thought of what could have happened. And as he drove the rest of the way home, watching every shadow in his rearview mirror, he couldn't help but wonder how many other cars they had marked, and how many drivers hadn't been awake to see it. Sometimes, the threat isn't chasing you down the highway. Sometimes, it's already waiting for you, parked innocently in the middle of the road. For a night nurse like Chloe, the drive home was a ritual of decompression. 12 hours of beeping machines, sterile smells, and quiet suffering would slowly peel away with each mile marker that passed. Her route was a lonely stretch of Highway 9 in western Massachusetts, a 2-lane ribbon of asphalt that twisted through dense, ancient forests and past the skeletal remains of forgotten mill towns. There were no streetlights here, no comforting glow of civilization on the horizon. At 3 in the morning, the road belonged only to her and the nocturnal creatures that watched from the impenetrable blackness of the woods. Tonight, however, the world had been erased by a thick, wet fog that clung to the road, reducing her visibility to a few precious feet beyond her headlights. The fog was so dense it seemed to muffle the very sound of her tires on the pavement, isolating her in a small, mobile bubble of light and sound. She was forced to drive at a crawl, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her eyes straining to pick out the faint, yellow lines that guided her through the disorienting whiteout. It was in this state of high alert that she saw the flashing lights ahead. Not the sharp, rhythmic pulse of police lights, but the softer, slower beat of hazard lights on an old pickup truck pulled over on the narrow shoulder. As she drew closer, a figure stepped out into the road, a stooped silhouette waving a frantic hand. Her first instinct, ingrained from years of training, was to help. She slowed her car to a stop, rolling down the passenger window just enough to be heard. An old man peered in, his face a road map of wrinkles under a greasy flannel cap. Rain and fog had beaded on his white beard. "Everything okay, sir?" Chloe asked, her voice calm and professional. He ignored the question, his eyes wide and urgent. He leaned closer, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely carried over the hum of her engine. "You listen to me," he said, his gaze darting nervously towards the dark woods behind him. "You get back in your car, and you don't stop. Not for anything. You understand? You keep driving till you hit the lights in Dalton. If you see a light in them woods, you drive faster." The warning was so bizarre, so out of place, that Chloe was momentarily stunned. He didn't look drunk or crazy, just deeply, genuinely terrified. "A light?" she asked, confused. But he was already backing away, waving his hand dismissively. "Just go." Now. He turned and shuffled back to his truck without another word, climbing in and shutting the door. Chloe sat there for a moment, a cold prickle of unease running down her spine. The encounter was deeply unsettling. Still, she had a long way to go. Shaking her head, she rolled up the window and pulled back onto the road, the old man's strange warning echoing in her mind. A few miles down the road, she saw it. To her right, deep within the forest, a single point of amber light appeared. It wasn't a flashlight beam. It was a soft, pulsating glow, like a firefly on steroids. It blinked with a slow, steady rhythm, almost hypnotic. It seemed to be moving with her, keeping pace from somewhere within the veil of trees and fog. The old man's words came rushing back. "If you see a light in them woods." Her heart began to beat a little faster. She told herself it was just a hunter's trail camera, or maybe a service beacon on a remote tower she couldn't see. But it didn't feel like that. It felt observant. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead. But out of the corner of her eye, the light remained, a constant, unnerving companion. It never got closer, never fell behind. It just stayed there, a silent, blinking eye in the dark, pacing her through the fog. The steady metronomic pulse began to feel like a countdown. A deep, instinctual dread started to seep into the car, colder than the autumn air. The woods no longer felt empty. They felt like they were watching. Then, without any warning, her car engine sputtered. It coughed once, twice, and then died completely. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging her into near total darkness. The radio cut out mid-song, replaced by an unnerving silence. Her car coasted for a few yards before rolling to a dead stop in the middle of the empty highway. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She frantically twisted the key in the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. The car was a dead hunk of metal. It was then that she noticed two things. First, the only light left in the world was the amber glow from the woods. Second, in the profound silence, she could now almost hear its pulse, a low subsonic thrum that seemed to vibrate in her chest. The blinking stopped being rhythmic. It sped up, becoming frantic, irregular, like a panicked heartbeat. And it was no longer moving parallel to the road. It was moving towards her. It sliced through the fog, a determined, focused point of light cutting a direct path from the woods to her car. Chloe's breath hitched in her throat. She fumbled with the door locks, pressing the button down with a shaking thumb, the thump of the locks engaging the only sound she could make. The light grew brighter as it approached, illuminating the gnarled, skeletal branches of the trees around it. This was no flashlight. The light was too warm, the glow too diffuse. It looked almost alive. She shrank back in her seat, trying to make herself as small as possible. The light was getting closer, its frantic pulse now a blinding strobe that made the fog itself seem to boil. It felt intelligent. It felt malevolent. It was only 50 feet away now, then 40, then 30. She closed her eyes, bracing for the sound of shattering glass, for whatever was about to happen. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light froze in place, a few dozen feet from her driver's side door, its pulsing slowing back down to a steady, curious rhythm. It hovered there for what felt like an eternity, as if it were studying her, considering her. And then, without a sound, it shot straight up into the sky, ascending above the canopy of the forest and vanishing into the thick, gray clouds above. It was gone. For a moment, she didn't move. The silence it left behind was somehow more terrifying than its presence had been. Then, with a sudden violent jolt, the car's electrical systems roared back to life. The headlights snapped on, the dashboard lit up, and the radio blasted static at full volume, making her scream. Her hands trembling uncontrollably, she turned the key. The engine roared to life on the first try, as if nothing had ever been wrong. She didn't wait. She slammed the car into drive and floored it, leaving a trail of rubber on the wet asphalt. She didn't slow down until she saw the warm, welcoming streetlights of the next town. The next day, after a sleepless night, she found herself scrolling through a local news forum online, a morbid curiosity compelling her. And there it was. A small article about a hiker who had gone missing 2 days earlier in the very same section of forest she had driven through. Search parties had scoured the area, but had been forced to call off the search at nightfall, with the sheriff citing unexplained equipment, malfunctions, and unsafe conditions. Chloe never drove that road at night again. She never found out what that light was or what it wanted. Was it connected to the missing hiker? Was the old man a guardian of the road or just another witness to its unsettling secrets? She only knew that something ancient and powerful lived in those woods, something that could silence the modern world with its mere presence. And for some reason, on that foggy, terrifying night, it had decided to let her go. Not all dangers of the road come from the darkness outside your car. Sometimes, the real monster is the one who offers you a ride. There's a certain kind of magic to a late-night drive home after a concert. The world outside the car is quiet and asleep, but inside, your ears are still ringing with the ghost of the music, your voice is hoarse from singing along, and the shared energy of the night creates a warm, impenetrable bubble. For Liam and Jessica, that bubble was their beat-up Honda Civic, cruising down a deserted country back road in rural Ohio. It was a shortcut Liam swore by, a winding path that cut through miles of cornfields, saving them 20 minutes on their trip back from Columbus. The corn was high, well over 10 feet in the humid August air, forming dense, dark walls on either side of the narrow road. It was close to midnight, and the only light came from their own headlights, cutting a tunnel through the darkness. See? No traffic, no cops, just us, Liam said with a confident grin, one hand on the wheel, the other intertwined with Jessica's. Jessica smiled, but a small, uneasy feeling had begun to prickle at the back of her neck. The sheer density of the cornfields felt claustrophobic, like they were driving through a maze with no exit. "It's a little creepy, though, don't you think?" she murmured, peering out at the black stalks that seemed to press in against the car. "You can't see anything past the first row." Liam just laughed. "That's the point. It's an adventure." It was just as he said the word adventure that his headlights caught something in the road ahead. It wasn't an animal. It was too large, too geometric. Liam cursed under his breath and slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching on the old asphalt as the car skidded to a halt just a few yards from the obstruction. There, perfectly centered in their lane, sat an old armchair. It was a big, overstuffed floral print thing, the kind you might find in your grandmother's living room, its fabric faded and stained by time and weather. It was placed so deliberately, so precisely in the middle of the road, that it looked less like discarded trash and more like a piece of surrealist art. "What the hell?" Liam breathed, staring at the bizarre roadblock. Jessica's unease instantly bloomed into full-blown anxiety. "Liam, no," she said, her voice tight. "Don't get out. Just turn around. Let's go back the other way." "Turn around?" "Jess, it's just a chair. Some kids are probably messing around," he said, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I'll just move it. It'll take 2 seconds." "I don't like it," she insisted, her hand gripping his arm. "It feels wrong." But Liam was already pushing his door open, a mix of annoyance and curiosity on his face. "Lock the doors. I'll be right back." He stepped out into the warm, buggy night, the car's engine idling, casting long, dancing shadows of the corn stalks across the road. Jessica immediately pressed the lock button, the thump of the mechanism echoing loudly in the sudden silence. She watched him through the windshield, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. As Liam approached the chair, he noticed something else. There was something sitting on it. Propped up against the cushions was an old porcelain doll. Its painted face was cracked. One of its glass eyes was missing, leaving a dark, empty socket, and a faint, permanent smile was etched onto its lips. A chill, completely at odds with the humid night air, snaked its way down his spine. This wasn't a prank. This was a setup. The thought screamed in his mind, sharp and clear. He took a half step back, his bravado evaporating, and in that exact moment, he heard it. A sound from the cornfield to his left, a soft, dry rustle. Shh! The sound of something moving through the stalks. His head snapped in that direction. Then, he heard the same sound from the right. Inside the car, Jessica saw them first. 2 figures, emerging from the corn. They didn't run or lunge. They stepped out onto the road with a slow, almost casual purpose, one from each side. Their movements synchronized as they began to converge on Liam. They were tall and gaunt, dressed in stained bib overalls with no shirts underneath. Their skin was pale in the headlights' glare, and their hair was long and matted. They moved with a strange, shambling gait, like their joints weren't quite right. Liam was frozen for a heartbeat, his mind struggling to process the nightmare unfolding in front of him. Then his survival instinct kicked in. He spun around and sprinted for the car. "Liam!" Jessica screamed, her voice muffled by the glass. As he ran, one of the figures casually bent down, picked up a rock from the side of the road, and threw it. The motion was fluid, unhurried. The rock sailed through the air and struck the windshield directly in front of Jessica with a sickening crack. A spider web of fractured glass erupted in her vision. But thankfully, it held. Liam yanked the driver's door open and threw himself inside, slamming it shut just as the first figure reached the car. "Go! Go! Go!" he yelled, fumbling with the gear stick. The man outside didn't try the handle. He didn't bang on the door. He simply pressed his face against the driver's side window, his features horribly distorted by the glass. He had a wide, toothless grin, and his eyes were dark, hollow pits. He raised a hand and began to scratch at the window with long, yellowed fingernails, the sound a high-pitched, nerve-shredding screech, like nails on a chalkboard. It was the sound of a predator trying to claw its way into a cage. Liam finally found reverse, the gears grinding in protest. He stomped on the gas, and the car shot backward. He cranked the wheel, executed a frantic three-point turn, and floored it, heading back the way they came. As they sped away, Jessica dared to look back. The two men were now standing side by side in the middle of the road, next to the armchair and its silent, broken occupant. They weren't chasing them. They were just standing there, two dark silhouettes against the red glow of the taillights, watching them disappear. Their stillness was almost more terrifying than the attack itself. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive home. The silence in the car was heavy with unspoken terror and the lingering image of that grotesque, smiling face. They never took that shortcut again. They never told the police. What could they say? That a piece of furniture and a creepy doll were used to lure them into a trap by two men who looked like they'd crawled out of the earth itself? They knew it sounded insane. But the cracked windshield was a constant, physical reminder that it had been real. They were left with haunting, unanswerable questions. What would have happened if Liam hadn't made it back to the car? Was it just a robbery or something far worse? And what was the meaning of the doll on the chair? A macabre, roadside offering? They would never know. They only knew that for a few terrifying moments on a dark country road, they had been the intended recipients of a gift they were lucky to have refused. The next time you're driving down a deserted road late at night, remember this. The darkness hides more than just the shoulder of the road. It hides intentions. Every pair of headlights, every roadside curiosity could be a warning you can't afford to ignore. What truly waits for you in the shadows of the open road? If you have a terrifying night drive story of your own, share it in the comments below. We want to hear it. Stay in the dark, subscribe, share, and never miss a scare.